Get up! Attack me! You've only suffered the loss of your legs. Summon up your familiars. Transform your body. Heal your severed legs and stand! The evening is still so young.
Like most people who grew up loner outcasts and were practically raised by the internet, I've always had a love, fascination, and appreciation for vampires and the lore associated around them. My affection for the dark, predatory monsters goes all the way back to watching the original Universal Monster movies with my dad as a kid. Seeing Bela Lugosi's dark and ominous stare enthralling his victims, and then later getting into shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, there's so many different interpretations of vampires throughout fiction, and I love how everyone puts their own little spin on it. Well, except for this, of course, over a decade later, and I still stand by that vampires do not fucking sparkle. But anyway, while getting into anime and manga as a teen, Hellsing stood out for many reasons. One, because at that time period it was one of the goriest and most adult manga I had seen and read, but also because Hellsing put a very unique and signature stamp on what their vampires are and could do. So I'd like to cover what exactly has them stand out from other vampires, as well as kind of give this its own monster manual treatment where I lay out the powers, abilities, and weaknesses, and if you have any chance of surviving an encounter with a vampire in this universe. So let's sink our teeth right in. So we all know the classic example of a vampire, right? I hope so, but if not, here's a very, very brief overview. Vampires are commonly seen as undead creatures that used to be human and now survive by draining the living of their blood or life energy. They've been interpreted as everything from really sexy to straight up demonic. In order to become a vampire, in most lore, a person must have their blood drained by an already existing vampire, and then drink the blood of that vampire. Afterwards, the human will die, and then resurrect as a new vampire. A creature that is now immortal, and must subsist on the blood of the living. In Hellsing, that's pretty much the same, but with two very specific requirements. One is that the human must be of the opposite gender of the vampire turning him. So, male vampires can only make female vampires, and vice versa. And second, that the human must also be a virgin. Virginity, when it comes to religions, is oftentimes seen as being holy or pure. So perhaps when it comes to making vampires, it has to do with the corruption of the innocent, making the idea of a vampire being more demonic if you're taking an innocent person and turning them into a monster. This way it's not like you can just desire to become a vampire and then have it happen, because if you already have that desire within you, odds are you've probably gotten laid at some point and now you've missed your chance. And the gender differences adds to the seduction and corruption aspects of it, perhaps luring you in by sexuality, especially if it's supposed to be a virgin. So that's definitely a factor, and Hellsing is filled to the brim with religious subtext, and virginity and sexuality is something always on the forefront of controlling the people when you look at it through the lens of religion, or the lens of anything for that matter. However, the unique aspect here is that if a vampire bites somebody who is not a virgin and does not kill them, that person does change into something else. But instead of becoming a vampire, they become what is called a ghoul. Now, a ghoul in the Hellsing universe basically means that you are in a zombie-like state, you lose your humanity, and are like a slave to the vampire that created you. But not a thinking, speaking, coherent slave, but like I said, a zombie just mindlessly following around their commands. There's more to ghouls, but that would be its own separate video, and I want to keep this one sticking to just vampires, because there's a lot to go over, and ghouls might get their own video. So back to vampires, and once the blood transference is done of a virgin of the opposite gender of the vampire, this new vampire is not fully transformed yet. To have all of its power and ability unlocked, it has to drink human blood on its own. Vampires in Hellsing have a ton of powers and abilities that we will see here in a moment, but a fresh, brand new vampire just only has the basics. Enhanced strength, speed, focus, stamina, some regeneration, but won't be able to unlock its full potential until it's drank the blood of a human on its own. The funny thing about all this is that despite specific lore on vampires, most of the vampires we see in the series are what is known as artificial vampires. Again, I think I'll save that for its own video, but it has to do with a Nazi organization named Millennium and performing experimentations on people to make them into vampires for their own evil purposes. But as you would imagine, these vampires are significantly weaker than true vampires and also cannot create more vampires on their own. But with that out of the way, let's run through the classic vampire knowledge of powers and abilities and compare it to Hellsing. Let's start simplistically and work our way up. So the most basic ability is the enhanced strength and speed. Hellsing definitely has this, and this is seen in almost every single piece of vampire fiction that has ever existed. Vampires are stronger and faster than normal humans. In Hellsing, vampires are shown to tear through people, tear them apart with their bare hands and their mouths. They have quick reflexes and heightened speed beyond that of any mere human. Moving on, we also have healing and regeneration. Given the fact that vampires are technically already dead, it would make sense that they couldn't be killed by conventional means. Many vampire TV shows, movies, and novels have their vampires able to take bullets or regenerate limbs. You're basically just shooting a corpse that's really strong and can move probably faster than your bullet. Hellsing takes this leaps and bounds though, and vampires can take almost any kind of damage that you can possibly come up with and keep coming back. Alucard, the main character, who is, also the most powerful vampire of all time and the most OP character ever, is able to have his entire body hacked to pieces, even his head severed, and still be able to reform himself. Now, in a lot of media, decapitation is actually one way to kill a vampire. And we'll get to the weaknesses here shortly, but for that one specifically, decapitation, vampires here don't seem to need to worry about it, at least when they've awoken all of their true power and potential, like Alucard has. But then again, Alucard is pretty much the most powerful vampire to ever exist, so you have to give him that little bit of credit too. Vampires have also traditionally had abilities to hypnotize or enthrall their victims, to put them in a trance-like state to make it easier to overpower them. I talked about Bela Lugosi's signature stare earlier, and the entire purpose of him doing that stare is to have that concept behind it. Hellsing treats it similarly, but Alucard also uses it to get through situations quicker so that he doesn't have to have full-fledged conversations, which makes me feel like it might be the most useful ability on this list. Think of all the human interactions that I would not have to have if I could just hypnotize people and then be on my way. But then we get into more complicated abilities, like how about vampires being able to turn themselves into bats or other animals? Vampires have been said to take the form of bats to fly, or wolves or other creatures of the night, that they are connected to that darkness, thus connected to animals that would be awake and thriving during the night. Well, Hellsing does this in a way, but takes it to the absolute extreme. Alucard is shown transforming and shifting his body into various creatures, but sometimes not even a full transformation, but part of his body turns into a dark-like mist that then takes the shape of a wolf that can then attack and eat its enemies. And that same wolf can also basically open its mouth and form Alucard's arm, holding a gun and fire off guns at the same time while there's a wolf creature and other black mist crazy shit happening at the same time. It's absolutely intense and terrifying. And plenty of other dark creatures, I'm sure, are on the list of possibilities. And vampires here don't need to turn into an animal like a bat to fly. They can just kind of channel that ability regularly to fly or levitate when the situation calls for it. And what about the blood draining? Well, in classic mythology, the idea of drawing blood from someone was that the creature was feeding on your very life force. Since blood is what keeps us moving and alive, it's the natural thing that we can use to understand the whole idea of draining someone's life force. But in even some mythology, vampires just drain our energy without needing to literally suck the blood. In Hellsing, it's shown that draining someone of their blood does in fact steal their essence of who they were as a person, or if you want to think about it this way, steals their soul. After a vampire drains you, they have access to everything that you were as a person, your power, strength, memories, desires, and well, everything. And when you've killed and drained as many people as Alucard has, well, you basically have the power of literal armies inside of your own body. And of course we have immortality, and this is also a common power of vampires in every single piece of lore, in that they are a dead body resurrected, so as long as they keep draining people of their blood, keeping themselves alive, they will stay alive. But also true in other media as well in Hellsing, that without consistent feeding on the blood of others, vampires will become weak and more corpse-like, as it's the blood keeping them powerful in the first place. So the longer they go without blood, the more of a decaying corpse they will become. So with all these incredible powers, what on earth could you or could anyone do if they had to face a vampire in the Hellsing universe? The most classic way to kill a vampire is a stake through the heart. This is how Dracula is ultimately defeated in the Bram Stoker novel, as well as how Dracula, spoiler alert, give you a couple seconds here to see if you want to continue the video, before he was Alucard, was defeated by having a stake through the heart done by the original Van Helsing, and how he was originally defeated by human hands. But Alucard, of course, was since able to be revived, so this could just be the fact that Alucard himself is such a powerful vampire that he could be revived and come back from being stabbed in the heart with a stake, and that maybe a stake through the heart would work on a standard vampire, but we don't actually get to see it in action, so it's very hard to say. Though it is alluded to that the heart is a vulnerable spot for vampires, but most characters are fighting with guns or bladed weapons, so a stake never really comes into play throughout the series, other than, like I mentioned, that one backstory moment. The second most common killer of vampires is sunlight. They are creatures of darkness and can only come out to hunt during the night. In many stories, they either sleep during the day or just avoid sunlight altogether. Alucard is seen in the daylight, however, once again, spoiler alert, Alucard is Dracula, and even in the Bram Stoker novel, as well as in the Dracula movies, Dracula himself has an immunity to sunlight to a large extent. It's just a staple of his character in fiction, and in a lot of times while in the sunlight he can't use his powers, but it does not kill him or affect him. Now, other vampires are mentioned to have a weakness to sunlight, but we don't actually see a vampire in direct sunlight other than, like I said, Alucard himself, so it's hard to say how much damage that it would actually do to a vampire in this series. Maybe we can infer that the longer a vampire has been around and honed its abilities, the more impervious to sunlight it becomes, but still I think we can all agree that they don't fucking sparkle. A weakness to silver and other holy or blessed weapons is around a lot in a lot of other fiction, as well in Hellsing itself. In Hellsing, Alucard uses guns and bullets that are made from melted silver of a Christian cross, so he's covering all of his bases there, and the bullets are super effective in harming vampires and other monsters. An interesting one in classic lore is vampires not being able to cross large bodies of water, and this is actually specifically important in Hellsing. And the legend seems to come from vampires not being able to leave their land of origin, and this is why Dracula brings along dirt when he leaves Transylvania. Apparently bringing soil is a bit of a loophole. Though I don't know what would happen to them physically if they actually just tried it, because that's not really explored. Another couple of weird ones that are not addressed in Hellsing, but I just thought were interesting and I wanted to mention them, is one, a vampire needing to be invited inside someone's home in order to enter it. I don't know if this just isn't a thing, but most of the scenes in Hellsing are in public places or outdoors, so it doesn't really come into play ever. It has something to do with one's willingness to submit to darkness, letting a demon inside. There's also being weakened or repulsed by garlic, and that's another one that is not addressed. Garlic has been used to ward off evil spirits and usually anything involving blood, which according to Google, some say it might have something to do with preventing porphyria. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a term that has to do with having irregularities in heme, a chemical that is in the blood, which I just thought that was pretty interesting. There's also a vampire casting no reflection, like having the lack of a soul, but again, not really addressed in Hellsing. And a very odd one is if a bag of rice or grain is spilled, a vampire would need to stop and count every single grain of rice. I really don't know where this legend came from, but I guess this is where they got the idea to make the count from Sesame Street, and I kind of just want to see Alucard blow a hole through that puppet's head while he's busy counting some grains.
I want to hear you squeal like a pig. I want to hear it, pig. So, squeal!
Yeah, that would be awesome. But anyways, guys, tell me what you thought of this and what you think of the vampires in the Hellsing universe as a whole. I tried to cover everything I could remember about traditional vampire lore, but I'm sure that I forgot something, and I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. But anyways, let me know what you think about all of it and how it compares with what we see in vampires in other fiction compared to vampires in Hellsing. Also, if this video gets some love, let's say at least 5k views and maybe like 100 likes, I'll make some more Hellsing lore videos on the artificial vampires, ghouls, and other things that are mentioned in the series. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. Please give it a thumbs up and a comment. Really helps it be seen in the algorithm. Share it with other Hellsing and vampire fans. Oh yeah, maybe subscribe too. I mean, if you're a vampire and you're going to be around for hundreds and hundreds of years, you're going to get bored at some point and you might want to watch some more videos. So just hit that subscribe button. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you in the next video.